Holy Steve Jobs. This is insane. I can't believe I have this. I still can't believe I have a Power Mac, but here we are assembling the ultimate late Y2K Macintosh setup. Now this is definitely a Steve Jobs moment. There is so much to talk about here that I don't even know where to begin. First off, cinema display. And not just any cinema display, but it's an acrylic cinema display, which is really awesome and is going to pair very nicely with the Power Mac. We'll talk about this in a second, and we will also talk about the current state of the setup in terms of like the Power Mac and, the monitor, and we'll just take a look at that later on. But first off, this was completely unexpected. I was initially going to actually work on the Power Mac, and before I even got a chance to even open it up and start cleaning it, this decided to stop by and say hello. It's obviously very cool to have this, but we still need to deal with the Power Mac, but at least now we can work on it with style. First off, you're probably wondering, why am I so excited about the monitor when I have the box for it? Now, I've actually had this box for years, unlike the display itself. And while I did get a display with this box, it was actually my aluminum cinema display that I currently use with my Mac Mini setup. While I do actually have a cinema display, I have not had an acrylic version. This is basically the oldest Apple product I have, alongside the PowerBook G4 and of course the aluminum display. Everything is now different though, because we actually have a cinema display, and not only that, it is the exact same model as the one that initially came in this box. Now, there are a couple of different ways you can actually tell that this is the last revision of the acrylic display, and that they are both identical in terms of an actual monitor was shipped in this box and that monitor being this model. First off, the box and the monitor both have the exact same copyright date of 2003. Now that year was also the last year they made this specific revision, because from 2004 and up, they switched over to the aluminum display. This is also an ADC display, and when they switched over to aluminum, they changed the video connector to DVI. Now, the version of macOS that is running on the display here is also a good indicator as to when this was released. This is the wallpaper for 10.2 Jaguar, and considering this was released in early 2003 when that was the current operating system, that seems about right. This can't be 10.3 Panther unless they used an older wallpaper for some reason, because 10.3 Panther also released in late 2003. There might be an updated box with 10.3 Panther, but at least for the one that I have here, it looks like it's 10.2 Jaguar. It also can't be 10.1 or earlier, because those had different wallpapers, and it's just very early macOS 10. And this also can't be 10.4 or later, because Tiger itself has that iconic wallpaper. Another obvious feature about this monitor in particular, especially when you compare it to the earlier revisions, is the fact that the Apple logo itself is metallic. The box has definitely seen some better days, and I'm pretty sure that this is not supposed to be broken like this, but I'm happy to just have the box at all, especially now that I have the matching monitor for it. What's even more exciting is that I have the styrofoam insert as well, so if I ever wanted to package up this display for some reason, I can do that, because, well, it actually has the packaging. Now, I know that this part is broken, but this is actually where the aluminum display, like the stand for the aluminum monitor was. I guess some modification had to be done in order to get that display in here. But this is just so cool to see. I mean, how often do you actually have packaging material for a 20-plus-year-old monitor? I know we talked a lot about the box itself, but I just wanted to show you guys that this is basically a complete setup now. But now let's go ahead and focus more on the monitor itself. If we take a close look at the Apple logo, you can see that it's reflective enough to show you the camera. It's a very cool feature to have on this monitor, and it definitely makes it stand out from the other acrylic displays. The display itself definitely needs a good clean, but that's the only thing wrong with it. Even though it's as dusty as a CRT, the acrylic housing is still in fantastic condition. It doesn't look like anything has yellowed or changed over time. And the best part is that the adjustable stand is still attached to the monitor. It's pretty common to see these break on these acrylic displays, but this one is still in brand new condition. Yeah, it's pretty dusty, but it's at least attached. Now that is an awesome Apple logo. And the best part about this monitor, as if the design wasn't enough, is the fact that there's only one cable coming out of it. Apple Display Connector is right up there with FireWire. It is such a cool standard to have, and even though it's inconvenient for modern day usage, for old Macs like the Power Mac here, you just plug it in and it works. Now this is truly a Steve Jobs moment, because it looks nice. DVI and ADC do look similar, but they are different because, well, just look at them. And even though ADC does make more sense in terms of usability, it's just not as practical as something like DVI. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, and you do need a special video card or the ADC adapter in order to actually use the monitor. The ADC connector alongside the USB hub makes this monitor super convenient to use on old Mac systems, but the other cool part about this is that you can adjust this monitor with just one hand because of the awesome stand that's built into it. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of how you want to arrange this monitor. You can even use it like this if you really wanted to. And as cool as that stand is, you still do have to be careful with it because, well, it is still acrylic. And like I said earlier, it is pretty common to see these displays with broken stands. But if you do have one intact, it is awesome to have. I first started off by wiping down the display itself. Surprisingly enough, that was probably the area with the most amount of dust on this monitor, which is really funny because it really does remind me of how a CRT collects dust. And of course, this is an LCD. It doesn't really do that, but I guess years of sitting will do that to basically anything. After that, I moved on to the bottom half of the acrylic housing, which was also one of the worst parts of the display itself. The rest of the acrylic was just fine, but for some reason the bottom half was surprisingly dirty. Based on the fact of how dusty the display was though, the rest of the dirt and debris was probably again just from inactivity and sitting around for years. After that, I moved on to the ventilation, and initially I thought it was relatively clean, but as I started to wipe it down, I realized that there was actually a lot of surface dust that you just couldn't really tell existed because of the color of the monitor itself. With this though, I realized that I probably could not just get away with wiping the exterior of the housing. That is, if I wanted to at least get a factory fresh finish. So I'm halfway through cleaning right now, and initially I wasn't planning on disassembling this. I thought we could just get away with cleaning the exterior of the housing and it would still look fine. But as I've started to take a closer look at this, there is actually quite a bit of dust and debris buildup between the acrylic outer shell and the LCD panel on the inside. It's not super noticeable on camera, but there is also some dust buildup on the bottom part of the legs here. And I guess it does make sense because this is not like a completely enclosed environment, and I guess over the years it has built up to the point where it is fairly noticeable if you do take a close look at it, especially down here where it's nothing but acrylic. So even though I wasn't planning on doing this, it's actually relatively simple to do, and it's definitely worth it because, for example, this part, which I could not get access to, is fairly dirty. Once I clean this up, it'll look much nicer than it currently is right now. And the acrylic is actually in very good condition. There's not really any scratching or scuffs on it. It was pretty dirty, but as you can see, this is almost brand new. For any minor amount of damage that it does have, I really don't care because this is a 20-plus-year-old monitor, and honestly, it still looks to be in very good condition. It just needs a good clean. So I have unscrewed these amazing Apple-looking screws here, and all I have to do now is detach it. I will be careful with this, but as you can see, it's coming off easily, and I might actually be able to do this like this. Yeah, there we go. That's the back housing of the acrylic there, and here is the inside. It kind of looks like an iMac from the back here without the acrylic, but all we have to do now is give this a good wipe down, clean everything up, especially the inside of the legs here on the bottom, and it's going to look much nicer than we started off with. Something else that I just discovered is that this is actually plastic. It's not metal. Now, even though it looks like a nice aluminum finish, it's plastic. And it's also held down with the same screws as the acrylic housing there. And if I remove this, we can see that it's also dusty inside. So I'm going to give this a good wipe down as well. And the internals also kind of look like an iMac G3. So it looks like the bottom shielding on the iMacs, everything about this looks like an Apple device. If you take a look at the design of the metal shielding, and then you look at the plastic housing, you can see that it's been copied onto it with dust. So even though I wasn't planning on doing this at all, it was definitely worth it because it's not only going to be closer to a factory fresh finish, but it's also going to help out with the temperatures of this monitor. Less dust and debris means that there's less of a chance of it overheating or causing components to degrade rapidly because of heat. Now that is a night and day difference. The acrylic itself looks really cool, but the dust is a big downside, so we have to actually get rid of it. And as you can see, there's just a huge amount of dust just casually sitting there. And once everything is fully cleaned, it'll look a million times better. After all that cleaning, here is the final result. It honestly looks brand new. I can't believe how well this actually cleaned up, and it looks like I just unboxed it, like I just bought it from the Apple Store or something. It's in fantastic shape. In fact, the dust is more noticeable than any sort of damage that this has. The only real damage, if you can classify it as that, is that there are some minor micro scratches, and you really have to try and find them. But that's pretty much bound to happen at some point with something like this. So I'm honestly happy with how it turned out. I will try and keep it as clean as possible. This turned out to be far better than I could ever have imagined. The only thing that has any sort of resemblance of yellowing is the ADC connector itself. So this part is actually still white, but the main connector does have a small amount of yellowing, and it's only on the top side here. The bottom side has a slight amount of yellowing, but it's nowhere near as bad as the top side. But then again, this is just the connector part. It's not the actual display. The inside of the cinema display is in fantastic condition, and even though it probably didn't need any cleaning, I still went ahead and gave everything a quick wipe down because I might as well. And what's really cool to see is this aluminum component to the adjustable stand. In fact, this probably resembles the G5 more than the monitor itself, but it's really cool to see that this has a nice solid construction. So I don't want to waste any time because the longer this sits out in the open, the more likely it could get dusty again. So first off, we need the plastic piece here. And I will also give this a wipe down again before we put on the acrylic because I want everything to be clean as possible anyways. You know, it's bound to get dusty again, but I want this to stay clean for a long time, and I can see that it's already pretty dusty again. Even though it's a minor detail, the ventilation here actually looks really great because of those sticker pieces. So you don't see any exposed metal or anything like that. It just looks like a continuation of the plastic panel. So it is a minor thing, but it actually looks really cool. Even though it took quite a while to make sure everything is as clean as possible, it was definitely worth it. I'm really happy that I went ahead and took it apart, and honestly, it wasn't that difficult to begin with. The only thing you have to remove are the 3 screws for the stand, which are smaller hex screws. These require a smaller hex screw bit, and the rest of the hex screws are identical except for the bottom 3. 9 of the 12 screws look pretty normal. Of course, it has the Apple finish, which makes it even more futuristic Y2K looking, but the bottom 3 screws are unique because they physically have more metal, which is probably because there's more acrylic in this area. I also want to show you guys the stand itself. Now this genuinely looks like a new old stock component, and I'm surprised I'm even saying that about the stand. You can clearly see through it, which is honestly surprising, And even the bottom part here doesn't have any scuffs or scratches or anything like that. It cleans up really well, but I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I'm really happy that I have such a good condition monitor, which I will try to keep in as good of condition as possible. By the way, you probably saw this earlier, but the cable for the cinema display was wrapped up with a reusable cable tie. Now, I don't think I'll need to use it in this setup, at least for the monitor, because there is a fair amount of distance between the desk and the Power Mac. But when it comes to the rest of the cable mess in the background there, I'm sure I'll find a use for it. This is the type of setup where you spend all your money on the professional Mac, and then you have to use the Windows Vista compatible VGA monitor. Now, this monitor actually does a really good job at being a monitor. Obviously, it doesn't really fit with the theme of the setup here. At least with this setup, we do have a matching Dell theme with the monitor and the keyboard, but this is supposed to be a super futuristic Y2K era, something like that setup, and everything so far looks the part except for the monitor. Even the hi-fi component system in the back, even though it's a little late for Y2K, it does have the silver theme, which also matches the Power Mac. And once we get this monitor on that desk, it's literally going to be a night and day difference. One of the greatest advantages of ADC is the fact that I don't need to deal with this. I don't need to have a separate video cable with a VGA to DVI adapter, because this doesn't have DVI, and I don't need a separate power cable. So the outlet that this is currently taking up on the power strip in the back there will be free, so I can actually use something else instead of just powering up the monitor. Or if I wanted to actually have a dual monitor setup, I could use a second monitor without having to take up two outlets. And yes, I do know that these are not exactly the highest of quality cables, but these were literally the first cables I grabbed alongside this monitor whenever I first got the Power Mac. These were initially just for testing, and I was planning on changing them out for better cables, but because we have the magic of ADC, I can completely just skip that, and we'll already have a functioning and cleaner looking setup. You can also tell that this was a temporary setup because I never even installed the VGA cable properly. So we can get rid of that. We can unplug the monitor. I'll get rid of those cables, the monitor, and finally install the cinema display. So out it goes, and I'm going to be more careful with the cables because I don't want to damage the desk. I still can't believe I have this. This is so cool. I can only imagine how cool it must have been to get a monitor like that, especially when they were brand new back in 1999 and 2000. For comparison, the Dell monitor is actually from 2008. So even though there's almost a decade in between the initial design of this monitor and that Dell monitor, this still looks like it's 20 years from the future. Now don't get me wrong, this Dell monitor and similar ones like it are still handy to have. This one is very convenient because it has a 4-port USB hub, and it also has a variety of video inputs. But in terms of the design, there's just no beating this. Unless, of course, it's another Apple display like the Acrylic CRT-based one with ADC. It is so cool to finally take advantage of the ADC connector on the graphics card. Even though the plastic itself is slightly yellowed, the cable matches the desk really well. I can also use accessories like this keyboard with a shorter USB cable because I can just plug it in. We have the Power Mac, we have the cinema display, we have the keyboard without the functional spacebar, and the mouse is optional. I think that this is a pretty cool setup, and all we need to do is press that power button. I do still need to use macOS from the external hard drive, but at the very least, I can actually power everything up with just the monitor. We did get a chime from the mini system, and I'm going to hold down Option. The hard drive will default to Sorbet Leopard, but I want to run Tiger because I feel like Tiger would look even better on this display. So I'm trying to talk about the monitor, and I'm wondering, why is the hard drive going so crazy? And then I realized, because I don't actually use this Tiger install all that much, it's actually indexing everything. So it's going to actually take forever to do. But anyways, let's actually talk about the monitor. So during startup, you probably saw that there is a very minor issue with the display. The border of the display itself has a small amount of yellowing, but I don't care. This is still a cinema display, it still looks fantastic to this day, and I actually have other displays with this exact same problem, which I have been using, and it really doesn't affect me at all. Under normal conditions, it's not noticeable, and it's only really noticeable if you're actively trying to look for it. Fortunately, this display doesn't have any dark spots or any damage to the LCD itself. One of the best parts about this display is the fact that it has macOS integration. So if I want to adjust something like the brightness, instead of having to adjust it manually with buttons on the front, all I have to do is press the brightness control here, the LED lights up, and here we have the control panel for the cinema display. So right now it's at medium brightness, but if we want to, we can actually decrease it or increase it. And that is actually a really bright image for this display. I will adjust it somewhere in between there. And right now we are actually displaying at a resolution of 1680 by 1050. Having this in the early 2000s would have been mind-blowing. It still looks amazing to this day. And of course we have the display profile set as cinema display because macOS integration. And in fact, we can actually use the power button itself to shut off the computer. Right now it's actually in sleep mode, so if I just press something on the keyboard, the Power Mac will wake up and we're back. But if we want to, we can also disable the power button, and if I do that, it's not doing anything. So that is really cool to see on this display. I probably will leave this enabled because having that feature is awesome. Software control, even though it does have some downsides, it still is really cool, especially on old macOS like this. So I've never really taken a close look at the old screensavers here, but the Cosmos Space one looks really cool, and I'm sure it'll look fantastic on this display. Even though these are older images and there are far better, higher resolution versions available nowadays, they still do a great job at showing off the color reproduction of this panel, and it's hard to believe that I'm actually looking at a 20-plus-year-old display. Now, even though the photos are lacking in sharpness, they make up for it by somehow adding on to the Y2K feeling. Probably because they were shot in that time period, but it also just feels right watching it on this display. It wouldn't be the same if you look at this on a modern LCD. It just somehow looks really cool. This one is called Abstract, and I wouldn't be surprised if Apple took these for modern versions of macOS because it looks basically identical, at least, as close as it can be to modern versions such as Sonoma, Ventura, stuff like that. It's abstract, that's for sure, but this actually matches the acrylic display more, probably because it has more reflections in the images. So it's not exactly one-to-one, but it also feels at home on this display, just like the Cosmos wallpaper. It's crazy how they made all of these wallpapers so different, yet so similar, and also really unique. This is obviously before the space era of wallpapers with leopard and above, but the Aqua interface with the Aqua wallpaper just looks so good, especially on this display. And even with the Jaguar wallpaper here, it looks fantastic. Panther, even more interesting. And there's even the graphite versions, which is really cool. So you have different variations of the same wallpaper. I really like how this turned out. I still can't believe I actually have this display, and it's crazy to see how well it actually cleaned up. I really do like it alongside the accessories, the desk, and of course the Power Mac itself, but we do still need to swap out the mouse for a matching acrylic mouse. If we take the mouse out of the way though, you can definitely see that there is a lot of potential still, and this is most certainly a late 90s and early 2000s type of setup. So this is definitely becoming the Y2K area of the iTunes setup, and it's going to be a very cool part of it. It's also probably going to be the only clean part of the setup as a whole, because with Y2K comes the futuristic and minimalism part of it, and even though it's not super practical all the time, at least for filming, we can have a very clean looking setup like this, And I really do love how ADC only needs one cable. But all we need to do now is, like I said, get the mouse that matches the keyboard, maybe get acrylic speakers for either side on the monitor. But then again, that is more of a G4 type of thing, and this is a G5. But maybe we can also get an acrylic Mac. So there's a lot of potential here. But at the very least, if you want to see this monitor in action alongside the Power Mac, then stay tuned because there's going to be a lot of cool stuff coming up with this. We still need a proper hard drive into the Power Mac itself, and I'm going to be installing as many operating systems as possible. So if you want to see that, then consider subscribing. But as always, if you enjoyed the video, then consider leaving a thumbs up. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.